We do have a lot of transactions where we buy the real estate in the existing lease. So, for example, that could be where they sell the business. It could be where the tenant wants to sell the real estate. They have, they set up a LLC with the tenant, and they already had an existing lease. We bought one of those. We bought a surgery center in Ponte Vedra Beach. And before we closed, we had them create a long-term lease. And for some reason, they didn't want to do a sale leaseback. They're like, we're going to create the lease. We're going to structure how we want, and then we'll sell it to you with that lease. We understand we might not get the same amount of proceeds from you, but we'll have the ability to know, like, hey, we don't have to pay for, certain maintenance repair. We're going to put that on the landlord. So that's what they want and felt comfortable. So we ended up buying the lease, and it was a 10-year lease, and the price was commensurate with the risk and credit and everything else. We end up creating our type of lease, which is an absolute net lease. And when you buy an existing lease, you end up with what I call the hair, the issues that are outstanding that you have to deal with. Do I have to pay for a certain insurance policy? Am I limited on insurance limits within a policy? What are my options? What happens option? Do I go fair market value? Do I go, what's the formula if they extend? How many options do they have that they're tying me up? So you lose a little bit of control compared to a sale leaseback. Sale leaseback, we can establish exactly what our marketable parameters, that if we ever need to refinance or sell the property, it's very marketable. What we do in a sale leaseback is when we structure this, we really increase the breadth of our audience that would buy it from us or that would finance it. When you buy an existing lease, all of a sudden we get in the business of looking at, okay, how are we adding value? What are we doing? How are we renewing this? Can we go back and do a blend and extend with the tenant? Can we go and reduce the rent and say, you know what? We're going to put on a new roof, new HVAC. You're going to take on that responsibility. However, I want an additional 10 years of term. Or am I giving them 7 months of rent abatement for 5 extra years of term? What am I doing to provide the tenant value and for us to get value in turn? So there's more risk when you buy an existing lease because you're taking on what's in that lease. And it's our job to figure out, for us and our investors, how are we going to add value? How are we going to make sure that the roots that we see built here continue? What do we do to add value? How do we build rapport in the process? How do we deal with some of the ambiguities in the lease? So it's a little bit more risk when you do that. And I'm talking about if you're comparing apples to apples, credit and locations, and just buying an existing lease to sale leaseback. If it was apples to apples and everyone's on the same playing field, obviously, if we're creating the lease, we're going to mitigate our risk. And that's the difference. However, you can get a great yield, a great return on your money when, we do deals. I'll give you an example. Years ago, we bought an imaging center in Columbia, South Carolina. Loved the deal. It was very unique. There was 3 years left. I bought it for a 10 cap. The guy was from Arizona, owner. He was out of state owner, didn't want to deal with it. The tenant was very challenging to negotiate and deal with. Okay. And you had to get to the right guy at the hospital system. So we end up buying this property. The neighbor's doing an apartment development next door. He needs us. We share a parking lot, a common parking lot. And at the end of the day, he said, I also don't want you going vertical because I'm doing an apartment development. And our walls were adjacent to each other. It was like an L. We were at the base of the L, and then his building ramped. And he said, if you go vertical, you're going to block views because that's how you're going to add value. And so what we did was we found out what was important for the tenant, and parking was important because people were coming in and maybe not doing well and had to go get imaging services and didn't want to park in a parking garage down the street. And so we figured out what was the tenant's pain, what was the apartment's developer's pain, and how we put it together. What we ended up doing is we sold the air rights above our building, okay, for cash, and also traded half the parking lot for our tenant and to make sure it was 24/7 parking for them. So then what ended up happening is we renewed them for a 10-year lease, and we got a little bit more rent because of what we did. And we ended up selling it for I think it was like a 6 cap with additional rent. So it was a nice deal for our investors. And, that was an existing lease that we added value.